Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmiritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Shularomapada Swaminiti Namine. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharini Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, thank you so much, Prema Krishna Prabhu, for coordinating this. I can say for a fact that I learned a lot during this exercise. I also would like to offer my gratitude to Bhaya Hari Prabhu, from whom I've been hearing since 2014 or 15. I think the first time that he started the Bhakti Vaibhava class. Prabhu has been doing this so sincerely for all these years, such commitment and consistency. And I'm sure there are many gaps in my presentation. They are all attributable to me only and to my lack of, understanding and preparation. So, however, my appreciation when I was reading this is that there is such jewels in Prabhupada's purpose when this is for me, my application is when I read it, it's all there. So Canto 3, chapter 13 through 19 is the Varaha Lila, and that is the unit 9 in Bhakti Vaibhava, and that's the part that I'll be presenting today. So it starts off where Vidura is inquiring Brahma as to, he wants to know about Swayambhuva Manu. What did he do? Because Swayambhuva Manu and Shaturupa, they came from Brahma. And Vidura is saying, I want to know about Swayambhuva Manu because he is a pure devotee of the Lord. And it's wonderful to hear about pure devotees from a pure devotee like you, Maitreya. So that is what Vidura is saying. And when he's thus asked of Vidura, asked of Maitreya, Maitreya instead has this appreciation of Vidura. So we see this inquirer asking a relevant question, and this has been the theme from Canto 1, right? So there is this, I guess I'll pause while people are coming in. All right, I'll continue. So there is this theme right from Canto 1. There is a relevant question posed by the questioner, and then the speaker, he answers, but also there is this appreciation, this devotee, this give and take that seems to happen, that it's there right from the start. So Maitreya says, you're being questioned by, you're questioning me on a wonderful subject, but hey, here is a quality of you that I appreciate very much. He says, oh, Vidura, you are a person on whom the Lord has kept his lotus feet. And so in purport, Srila Prabhupada talks about how Vidura was visited by Krishna. And Krishna said, I don't want to go to Duryodhana's palace, which is all opulent. I want to go to his palace or his humble hut. And so Vidura, and then there is this famous pastime of, him peeling the banana and feeding the Lord the banana peel and then discarding the banana itself. So Maitreya first appreciates Vidura, who is asking the questions. Then he goes about answering him. He says, yes, from Brahma came the Swayambhuva. And then he talks about how Swayambhuva's attitude pleased Brahmaji very much. As soon as Swayambhuva Manu and Shatrupa came, they asked him, how can we serve you? You for sure have a purpose for us. How can we be of service? And this attitude was very, very pleasing. And in those purports, Prabhupada talks a lot about the son and the father relationship. And because previously, when the Kumaras came and they were asked of a service, they said no to it. And we know that Brahma got upset, and from that, Rudra, Lord Shiva, appeared. So now Swayambhuva is asking this humble inquiry, and Brahma is very pleased. Now, just in those purports, Srila Prabhupada talks about two things that I just wanted to point out. One is this genealogical succession, the father, son, that kind of a thing. We see that. But the second is also a spiritual or the disciplic succession. So from Brahma, Narada and so on, Vyasa and Madhva and all of that. And Prabhupada, he brings it all the way from there, up till the point of his divine grace, Srila Prabhupada. So there are two kinds of successions. One is this genealogical, the other is the spiritual. That is one thing I wanted to point out. The second thing that Prabhupada points out is that when the Kumara said no to Brahma, now it doesn't mean that we can say the same thing to our parents. They had a higher cause. And so therefore, they were not subject to this reaction, because saying no to a personality like Brahma has its reaction, but they were not subject to that reaction because they had a higher cause. So now that initial questioning has happened, now Brahma is going to be answering. But Swayambhuva is asking Brahma, he says, all right, I have this duty of, my duty towards the mankind, but hey, where is the earth? The earth seems to have sunk. So then Brahma talks about, from that point on, he talks about, he's wondering, actually, he himself is also wondering, he's wondering what happened to this earth, how come it's sunken? And Prabhupada writes in that purport, he says that devotees may be perplexed in their duty, but they are never discouraged. So Brahma, similarly, even though he was perplexed, he wasn't discouraged. So at that moment, the Lord appears from Varahadev, as Varahadev from the nostril of Brahmaji. And it is said that he was the size of an upper portion of a thumb. From that tiny, external size, he grew big. And it was such a wonderful sight that everybody was bewildered, including Brahma, who was the firstborn. The Lord's form is so uncommon that it threw them off completely. And they went through different phases, emotionally. There was confusion, there was argument, there was amazement. And then finally they realized, if this is such an uncommon form that came from the size of a tip of the thumb and it grew so big, it cannot be anybody. It has to be the Supreme Lord. And then they started offering him prayers. So this form of the Supreme Lord, transcendental form, is presented in those verses. So Prabhu, I could share my screen if it's of any value to people. So this is a simple document. I didn't do any presentation like Ravi Prabhu did, but these are my notes from chapter 13. And so once this is happening, I just spoke about how the sages started to argue. Prabhupada writes, this form, even though it's a hog, is a very degraded form in the material world, but his form is transcendental. And so there is nothing material about it. There is no material contamination. And quite wonderfully, this Lord who came as a hog started smelling the earth, just smelling for the earth, just like any other hog would do, right? And Prabhupada says that he can play any part perfectly. And it is pleasing to anybody, even though it is fearsome like Narasimhadev, or even though it is like loathsome like a hog. And so then the Varaha, he came and he dove into this Garbhodaka ocean. And it is said, this poetic image comes, the waves arose as if, they're raising their arms and they're crying and they're offering prayers. So the ocean rose up like that. And so Bhayari Prabhu in his classes, he talks about, he calls it Nila Varaha. And I heard him say that, it's either Nila Varaha or Rakta Varaha. It is that Varahadev who killed Hiranyaksha. And that happened in the Chakshusha Manvantara. However, in the very first Manvantara, the Swayambhuva, which is what we're hearing right now, Shweta Varaha came. And he sported in the water just like an elephant would sport in the water. And so then the sages were offering prayers to him. And they are saying, your personified Vedas. And I think I heard Bhayari Prabhu speak this, and I personally don't have any realization of it. So it might come out muddled. Just like, that the Vedas are breathed in, when the Lord appeared from the Brahma's nostrils, it is this Vedas. So Varaha Dev is called as personified Vedas. And as we hear, from these pores of the Lord's body, transcendental body, these Brahmandas, they come about. And so the ocean is right there in all of those. Now, as the sages are offering these prayers, just like a perfect foil, who cannot understand this form of the Lord? The sages are understanding this form. Now, who cannot understand the form of the Lord? They are the 4 kinds of miscreants that Bhagavad Gita talks about. Namam dushkritiro mudap, all of that maya pakrita jnana. So Prabhupada talks about that in his purport, the Veda Vadarata. So he's saying those are the people who follow the Vedas, but actually they don't understand him. This transcendental form that the Lord has taken cannot be understood by those people. And so what is the way out? And one thing that I saw was this back and forth. So on the one hand, the sages are understanding. On the other hand, the miscreants don't understand. Now, what is the method? The method is the Sankirtana Yajna. Now, this table is actually given by Bhayari Prabhu. I just put it right here. And he doesn't elaborate much in his classes. And Prabhu says that it's not been elaborated much either. So, different attributes are given. They say the skin is like this, the bodily hair, the eyes, and, different parts of his transcendental body are spoken of vis-a-vis like Yajna or Sankirtana. So this, like I said, this is not something I have anything to talk about. It is there and you can refer that. Now that the Lord has come, and now that they have glorified him, now their description is happening. When the Lord picks up earth, it is very beautiful sight. It's almost like the lotus that's being held by the Lord. And this imagery of like when we go to a hill station or something in India, right? Like there's this beautiful hill, but when it's covered on the top by clouds, it looks even more beautiful. So the Lord, similarly, when he picked up earth, the earth became beautiful, and so did the Lord. And it is said that the Lord's beauty is enhanced by his devotees. And Bhumi Devi, being his devotee, her beauty was also enhanced, or the Lord's beauty was enhanced. I think they both go together. So then the sages are glorifying. They further say, "Oh Lord, you are the Father, the seed-giving Father, and the earth is the mother. She is not independent. And you, whatever power is there in her, like the gravity, the pull of gravity, is actually your potency. It is your power that you've invested." And then they say, your activities are wonderful, but they're actually not wonderful at the same time. Why are they not wonderful? Because you are the Supreme Lord. Everything that you do, all of those things are inconceivable for us, but for you, they're totally normal. So in that sense, there is this, he's wonderful and he's not, and these activities are not wonderful at the same time, because there is no limit to Krishna's or the Lord's glories and his activities. And when we think that there is a limit, then Prabhupada says that is nonsensical. That mentality is nonsensical. So after the sages have offered these prayers, the Lord places the earth on the water and he's sustaining it by his potency, and then he leaves. And very, wonderfully, Vyasadeva is offering us this blessing. He's saying that when we read this description of Varaha's appearance and his activities, these are the blessings one will receive. We understand everything. We achieve transcendental knowledge, and one is delivered from material pangs. So I thought this very perfectly matches or parallels what is given in Nectar of Devotion as Kleshagni and Shubhada. It is said that in the very first stage, like even in our Vaidhi Bhakti, these two leaves, they sprout, Kleshagni and Shubhada, are the material pangs are reduced, that fire is put out, and there is auspiciousness in our lives. So this was very quickly the first chapter. Any thoughts thus far, or should I proceed? Because I have 7 chapters to cover. Okay. So then once this is happening, Vidura has a question. He's saying, hey, the Lord looks like picked up the earth, but I actually heard that he killed Hiranyaksha. What about that? So I'm sorry, I'm I'm paraphrasing the whole thing like this. That's because I tell stories to my children like that. But definitely there's more nuances to that when you read Bhagavatam. But essentially Vidura is saying, I heard that Varaha Dev killed Hiranyaksha. Could you speak to that? So again, the detail is that in the Chakshusha Manvantara, he killed Hiranyaksha, but in Swayambhuva Manvantara, he lifted the earth. So Vidura, by his example, he's teaching us what active hearing looks like. It's not a passive hearing. He's hearing, he has questions, he's asking them. And he's eager. He wants to know more activities of the Lord. And this fighting with Hiranyaksha, that's also something he wants to know. And Prabhupada says that when we hear of the Lord's pastimes, it is never stale. It never gets stale. It never gets boring. And there is nothing in the material world that compares to this experience. So once he's questioned, again, Maitreya, we see, just like in the previous chapter, in this chapter, Maitreya is again appreciating Vidura. He's saying, hey, you're a warrior, not just because you're born in Kshatriya family, but you actually like listening about these chivalrous pastimes of the Lord. And Prabhupada writes in the purports, he says, these pastimes do not compare with the mundane war, where people and property are destroyed. Rather, these topics where there is a fight between the Lord and the demons, these very topics take us against the repeated birth and death. They take us out of birth and death. So just like in the battle of Kurukshetra, so many people were killed, but they did not perish. Materially, their bodies must have perished, but spiritually, they were all liberated. That is the potency of the Lord. Even when it is in so-called quote-unquote war or, destructive pastimes. So then he attributes, he says, you know what, long ago, I heard about this pastime from Brahma. The question that you're asking, let me answer that. So then he goes back and he says, how do the demon Hiranyaksha come about? So now it turns out this is where Diti and Kashyapa, they come in. Diti, one of the wives of Kashyapa, is afflicted with lust and she begs her husband. And the setting is totally inappropriate. The timing is totally inappropriate. And her husband, worst of all, her husband is in a trance. And because he's in a trance, she knows that she speaks loudly to him just to attract his attention. And because of lust, her intelligence is lost. It's like a mad elephant. And she's acting as a victim. She keeps talking about what are the duties of the husband and then what he would get. So, she says, what are your, like in the United States, we talk about it anywhere, right? Like your rights and responsibilities or rights and duties. So she says, hey, this is your duty and this is what you'll get. So she keeps going back and forth between she says, you're a Prajapati, you need to beget children. And then she expresses her affection. She says, my father, Daksha Prajapati, he asked all of us, and 13 of us, we all said we want to be your wife. Am I not faithful to you? Just like my other 12 sisters? Now you have given all of them this blessing of having a child and you haven't blessed me yet. What am I lacking? Are you being fair? And so she goes back and forth like this. And in the purport, one of the purports, Prabhupada says there is a parallel where Kaikashi approached Vishravas at the wrong time, at the wrong place. And then who was born? The Ravana, the biggest demon of all. He was born. And so this happened. This is happening with her. Now, I've noted these verses here between 17 and 21 in this particular chapter. Kashyapa is responding. Even though he is doing his spiritual activities, he could not, say no to his wife. He tried reasoning with her. He's saying, oh, I acknowledge your role. He says, you know what? You are such an important part of me when I perform dharmic activities. You help me protecting me from lust. You help me build a house. You support me in my dharmic activities. You are like a boat so that I don't sink. And so he's talking about all of this. And the next, Bhayahari Prabhu talks about these 5 people that in general that we are indebted to. We are indebted to demigods. And the way we discharge that debt is through performance of yajnas. We are indebted to the rishis. And the way we discharge that duty is through swadhyaya and outreach. We are indebted to the pitras, the people who have come before us, our forefathers. The way to do that is through Pitra Yajna. We are indebted to the mankind, and the way we discharge that is through compassion, forgiveness, and charity. We are indebted to Bhutas, and the way we discharge that is through non-violence, vegetarianism, and protection. They're all right here. So Prabhupada says in this section, into verse 20, he says that senses are like plunderers of the fort of the body, and the wife is like the commander to the fort. So Kashyapa spoke very pleasingly to his wife, saying, I am protected because I have lust, and I am protected when you are there protecting me. And he was hoping to pacify her. So this was one tactic he used. Here is the next tactic. He goes on to say, hey, what is the repercussion if we don't do this? We will displease Lord Shiva. It is at this time that Lord Shiva and his followers, who are ghostly beings, they are visible. And who is Lord Shiva? He's known as Ashutosh. He's extremely pleased, he's pleased very quickly as he is angered. He is so merciful. He provides shelter for people that are materially suicidal, like literally people who commit suicide. When they get those ghostly bodies, the ghostly beings, or rather when they don't get the gross body, Lord Shiva is their master. But he's also protector of people who are spiritually suicidal. So people who want to merge or who don't want to serve the Lord, they are known as spiritually suicidal. So Lord Shiva protects, he gives them shelter through his Mayavada philosophy that he's propounded. So Kashyapa is saying, Lord Shiva, he's easily pleased, but watch out, he's also easily angered. And he is the protector of ghostly beings. So when we perform this forbidden act at the wrong time, he will make sure that those ghostly beings they get a body through you. So, and then he's saying, Lord Shiva has 3 eyes. They're like the sun, moon, and fire. He can see the past, present, and future. So he could very well see you and me performing this forbidden act. So please don't think that he's related to you through sati. And so you don't take it for granted. Don't think that he's your relative and therefore he'll let go of this transgression. He has total detachment. He refuses to accept luxuries, and therefore you cannot take advantage of the fact that he is your family member. So in that way, now through providing the pros and cons, so to speak, Kashyapa is trying to deter his wife instead of putting a strong no. Now again, this table is provided by Bhayahari Prabhu. It's there. But I think I've covered whatever she spoke and whatever Kashyapa spoke. It's all in here. So I'm going to skip that. And finally, Kashyapa, after he speaks of all of that, he gives in. He knew very well that this would not please Lord Shiva, and yet he did give in. He could not take a firm stance. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada talks about Haridas Thakur, how when the prostitute came or when Maya Devi herself came, he took a very firm stance. So it was his internal consciousness that protected Haridas Thakur. And Prabhupada says, like, being born in a Brahmin family and doing those external things are not factors at all. They don't protect us. It is this internal consciousness, the Krishna consciousness, that gives us protection. So after that, we see that Diti is remorseful almost immediately. She now her heart is, she's fearful. She's saying, hey, pray, please, can you pray to Lord Shiva? He's Ashutosh. Can you please pray to him because you're his devotee? Can you ask him to protect my pregnancy? And she's invoking Sati so that Lord Shiva may be pacified. And she was fearful of her husband too, because now she realizes he was in trance and she had distracted him. So after she is remorseful, Kashyapa speaks to her and he talks about how the religious and regulative principles must be followed. So this is where Prabhupada goes into, Garbhadana Samskara. He says how the father and mother, their mental condition is important, that there is, time, place, and circumstances must be considered, the demigods must be pleased. All of these factors have to be taken care of in order to get good progeny. And the reference to Varna Sankara from Bhagavad Gita is also spoken of. And he's saying when none of these are followed, guess what? Rakshasas are going to be born. And Prabhupada writes very nicely, it's like a social commentary right here. Unwanted children cannot be a source of happiness. However, in the present age, they can be raised by chanting of the holy names. These demoniac sons will be a source of pain and unhappiness to all around them. The Supreme Lord will descend to kill these miscreants. I just wanted to add a little comment that one of our senior god brothers he had spoken that there is an effort that the parents have to put in before a child is conceived. Yes, it can take a few months and yes, it takes effort. But that quote unquote, the pain of that austerity, so to speak, is far less than having a progeny who is not good enough. And the pain of raising them is far greater. Let me say this again. The pain of raising a bad progeny is far greater than the pain of austerity before conceiving them. That's in short. So Kashyapa is speaking of all of these. Now, for the second time around, she speaks. She's saying, and then when Kashyapa says, don't worry, these children, they will be demons. Yes, for sure. But these demons will be killed by the Supreme Lord. Now, Diti, she understands that the killing of her son, so even though her lust overtook her at that point in time and the intelligence was lost, now she is back on track. She is relieved to hear that they won't die because of the wrath of the Brahmanas, which is worse. Rather, they'll be killed by the Supreme Lord. So both the killing and the blessing of the Lord are the same. So in a way, it is seen that she is not an ordinary person. She is satisfied that her children would be killed by the Supreme Lord. And she's also satisfied that her grandson would be a pure devotee. And then there is this whole section where about 7 verses, the glories of Prahlad Maharaj is given. And here, again, I think Bayari Prabhu had a table right here. There are 5 reasons, the 5 faults that Diti had initially, which were nullified because of her active remorse that she has. So Kashyapa acknowledges that she is repentant, and he says all of this will be negated. This temporary lack of judgment will be negated. And Prahlad, and he says Prahlad would not only see the Lord through his meditation, but he'll actually see him personally, face to face. So that would end our second chapter, summary of chapter 14. So going on to chapter 15. So Diti carried her pregnancy for a long time, for 100 years, because she is worried. On the one hand, like she knows that her sons would be demoniac and they would cause much trouble to demigods. And so then finally what happens is there is this, because of this pregnancy, the whole environment became very, very fearful. It became extremely dark, and the demigods are afraid, and they go and ask Brahma, what's happening? And they're almost praying as if Brahma is on on an equal footing of Lord Vishnu, but this is because of their anxiety. And then at that point in time, Brahma tells the story to the demigods. So Brahma is telling them, okay, a long time ago, what happened was, there were my sons, the 4 Kumaras. They traveled through this entire universe and they reached the spiritual sky because they had become free from material contamination. So then there is this section, about 9 verses, where there is a beautiful description of the kingdom of Godhead. The men, the people who live in Vaikuntha, the Vaikuntha Vasis are described. They have this sarupya form, right? Like the form of the Lord. They continuously worship Hari. And they have absolutely no desire or, sense gratification, like a desire other than the Lord's desire. So they were totally in line with the Supreme Lord. And the other thing is, there are men and women. They're all extremely, externally good looking, but they're not distracted by that. Their focus always remains Vishnu. So a description of the people are given. Then the Lord is described, how he is to be understood just by the Vedic scripture, and how he is in this pure goodness. And then the forest in Vaikuntha is described. This is full of desire trees. We hear how in the material world, a mango tree can only give mango. If I desire something else, it cannot. But in the spiritual world, it's not like that. They're known as desire trees. And the birds, the couples, the plants, the airplanes, the women, everything is described. So just an added point, I was listening to Guru Maharaj speak last week on Brihad Bhagavatamrita, and in that there is a description how there is every kind of, there is more detail to these verses basically, where there is every kind of forms, plants and animals and even insects. There's even insects that live in that, but they're all there because their only goal is to please the Supreme Lord. They take up those forms for the pleasure of the Lord and nothing else. So Prabhupada writes in this verse 23, he says, there is so much variegatedness in the material world. How can you say that there is no variety in the spiritual world? If you say that there is no variety in the spiritual world, then certainly your intelligence is misplaced. And after that, after Brahma, so Brahma is describing, remember, so Brahma is speaking about what happened. Like, why did these Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu come? He's going to talk to them about it. So he's saying, then he's describing what did the Kumara see in the spiritual world. Now he's saying, that place. Then he's talking about the human form of life. So he's saying, us as demigods, we have the best of material bodies and we have the best of material situation. And yet, persons like me, that is Brahma speaking, saying, we desire human form because that is the best, quote unquote, the best boat to cross this ocean of material existence. And if the human form is considered the boat, what is the captain? The spiritual master is the captain. He guides us. And the scriptures are the favorable winds. So then Prabhupada writes in that, again, this is, he's urging us. He's saying now that we have this human form, we should not let go of it. And he's strongly condemning, if we don't take advantage of this, then we are committing a spiritual suicide. And so these are the people. So here is the desire Brahma has, again, like a compare and a contrast. So Brahma is desiring a human form so that it can be used to understand the Supreme Lord. On the other hand, are these people, if they don't, so people who don't care for spiritual, they are committing spiritual life, are committing spiritual suicide. On the other hand, there are these people, Let's say they don't care for austerity, they don't care for meditation, but they only care for the hearing the glories of the Lord, they are eligible to go back home, back to Godhead. And there is a very big purport where Prabhupada talks about how can you go back to Godhead? You have to have spiritual qualities. It is not that we have to give be a prominent spiritual person in order to go. We have to have those spiritual qualities, which are described here in Srimad Bhagavatam 5th canto. And then Chaitanya Charitamrita lists 26 qualities. And then there is another reference, the Titikshava Karunika verse. When a person who has those qualities, they are gradually promoted to the spiritual kingdom. So again, compare and contrast. Who can go to the spiritual kingdom? People who have the qualities. Who cannot go to the spiritual kingdom? That is right here. On the other hand, a person whose heart does not change in spite of chanting the holy name is said to be steel-framed heart. Now, why will our heart not be touched by the holy name? It is because of those 10 offenses. Is there a hope for us? If we don't, so let's say, I don't experience ecstatic symptoms because I am an offender. Do I have a hope? Do I have a grace? Yes. Prabhupada says yes, because if you chant with even a little bit of a faith, Lord Chaitanya and Nityananda's names, very quickly, I can be cleansed of all those offenses. Then we can feel the ecstasy of the love of Godhead. So yeah, this purport is very beautiful where Prabhupada talks about all of this. It's a very big purport. Talks about the two sides. Anyway, so after Brahma spoke of that, how human form is important, he again describes the Kumaras. He's saying the Kumaras, when they entered the spiritual realm, they were taken over by unprecedented happiness. I found this purport very interesting. I'll point out the particular line. He says that they were able to enter Vaikuntha realm by perfection of mystic yoga process. So this is way beyond the yama, niyama, asana, pranayama and all of that. They had attained all the Ashtasiddhis. And then there was this particular line that intrigued me. He says, just like the Ashtasiddhis are heavier than the heaviest, smaller than the smallest, lighter than the lightest, he says that they became lighter than the lightest and thus they reached Vaikuntha. And the happiness that they experienced is because of Yoga Maya. And they became very eager. They wanted to see who the Supreme Lord, the Lord who presided the Vaikuntha. And they did not even look at the 6 gates because as they were entering, there was so much opulence, but their mind was fixed. They wanted to see the Supreme Lord. They were eager to meet him. They did not care for any of those opulences and they rushed. Now, as they were rushing to go, the 7th gate, there were 2 gatekeepers who stopped them. And an interesting thing, Prabhupada says those 2 gatekeepers look to be the same age. Because in Vaikuntha, who can say? There is no old age. So the bodies never age. And so it is harder to distinguish who's older than whom. And these 2 gatekeepers, again, as Sarupya, had Sarupya forms like Lord Narayana. They were bluish in color. They wore fresh garlands. And it is said that there were bumblebees that were madly going after the garlands that they were wearing. And there is a description of them. They had their noses upturned and they were agitated. And so as these 4 Kumaras who were literally, they looked like children with bare bodies. It is said that the air, it clothed them. They entered, and just like a child, like for example, you take a child and you stop them, a child would get sorry and angry. And this is what happened with the Kumaras. Now, they were not stopped anywhere, but here they should not have been stopped. So, and Prabhupada writes in those purports, it says, seems like the doormen had natures contrary to the Lord's disposition. What was the Lord's disposition? He welcomes the saintly people. And these doormen, they stop the saintly people. And Prabhupada says that saffron dress of a sannyasi is a passport to travel everywhere to enlighten people, and thus they should not be checked. Now, the Lord here is described as Suhrittama, or the best of friends. And this is very moving. He comes himself even though we haven't kept up with our end of relationship. Right? So in any relationship, it's a two-way relationship. But in our case, as a materially conditioned souls, he still keeps his end of the bargain, even though we have lost it. So, but going back to the Kumaras, now they became extremely angry. And for example, whenever there is a desire, of course, the Bhagavad Gita, what it says is the spiritual, not spiritual, sorry, the material, the fall down, so to speak. Right? So, dhyayato vishayan pumsa sangasteshu pajayate, sangat sanjayate kama, kamat krodho bijayate. It is from the dhyayato vishayan, when we meditate on the object, there is this whole sequence, kamat krodho abhijayate. When the desire is not fulfilled, it leads to anger. Now, is the anger exhibited by the Kumaras, was it material, like it might happen to me? No. What is the difference? The difference is that the material anger is due to sense gratification, being frustrated, whereas in a spiritual context, it is due to interruption of the Lord's service. Again, this is something that I really like, this point in the purports. What does this say? That even in this liberated stage, jivas experience sensual activities, they experience emotions, but everything is dovetailed towards the Supreme Lord. If we go to the spiritual world and there will be no emotion, no feeling, that is not the case. There are emotions, there are feelings, because each one of us is an individual soul. And when something is, but however, everything is dovetailed for the Lord's pleasure. So the Kumaras become upset, and now they are wondering aloud. It's almost like they're speaking aloud. They're saying, who are these two people? They seem to have natures contrary to the Lord's qualities. And this is just my note, because I like this quote from Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. He says, whenever we see a fault in others, we should understand that the same fault is honeycombed in our own hearts. So the Kumaras say something similar to this. Who cannot enter Vaikuntha? Only people who don't have spiritual qualities. So should the Kumaras be stopped? No. They had their devotional quotient. Why are they being stopped? Are the doormen thinking that these Kumaras are unfit to enter? So then, therefore, the Kumaras concluded, no, it is to be understood that the doormen found a reason to stop them, because that reason was honeycombed in their own hearts. So this was the conclusion that the Kumaras came up to. Now, in the spiritual world, there is complete harmony. Everyone is satisfied because everyone is trying to satisfy the Supreme Lord. Now, in the material world, what do we see? There is complete disharmony because there is a deviant, we have deviated from that. And in the spiritual world, there is complete harmony, and therefore there is no fear, there is no enmity, there is complete peace, and everything is perfect. So it's like there is like a oneness in purpose for everything. And so there's no divide. So what is the need for them to stop? And so Kumaras, as they are thinking like that, they decided, because these two people have such discordant mentality, they don't deserve to be in the Vaikuntha planet, and they deserve to be in the material world, because that is the mentality. And in a way, they are thinking that is what will be suitable for them and beneficial for them. Because the doorkeepers found, like I said before, there is oneness in purpose, but these doorkeepers seem to find duality in purpose. And so they said this mentality does not belong to Vaikuntha, therefore they should be sent to the material world. Now Prabhupada writes that when a criminal is sent to a person, the hope is that they will be remorseful and they will eventually reform. So as soon as that is done, they've decided to send these doorkeepers. The doorkeepers are becoming remorseful. They've decided, they understood their mistake. They at once fall down at the feet of these Kumaras. They're in anxiety because they don't want to leave the Lord's service. They very humbly accepted the curse. They did not justify their action. They realized that they had committed an offense against a devotee and they accepted their mistake. However, they begged for one thing. That one thing was that they said, please, wherever we go, please let us not forget the Supreme Lord. And so one line is said that they did not want to take their birth in the lower species of life. This is because in lower species of life, there is forgetfulness of the Lord. Just as at that moment, the Supreme Lord appeared. And so long, these Kumaras had only seen the Supreme Lord in their hearts, but now they get to see him in person. He comes there with Lakshmi Devi, his internal energy. And there is a beautiful description of the Lord. And it is said that this description of the Lord's paraphernalia, his beauty and everything is like Udipan. It springs forth our attraction for him. And it is, I in my notes from Bhayari Prabhu, I had written that darshan of the Lord is for all the senses, not just for eyes, right? Like, we smell the lotus feet and like all of those. So there is a complete description of that. Now here is another thing that for me, it struck me was that when the Lord came, he mercifully looked at the Kumaras, that is the offended, and he mercifully looked at the two doorkeepers who are the offenders the same way. His vision was equal, and this is because of his transcendental nature. And that being said, we should still be careful to not commit any offense to another devotee. Now, a description, again, there is this table that is provided by Bhayari Prabhu. One of the things that I personally loved in this description was, there is this, he's very pleasing, he's darkish in complexion, he's broad-chested, he's wearing yellow clothes, and this endearing description of how he has one arm resting on Garuda and is with his other hand, he's twirling a lotus flower, and he is there in this very pleasing manner. And very, very attractive. And Prabhupada says that the Lord, being Bhakta Vatsala, wanted to please his devotees. So it is said that the Lord appeared more attractive than Lakshmi Devi. Why is that? Because the mood in Vaikuntha is that they want to see the Lord as the most beautiful one, and so he does. However, the mood in Goloka is that the devotees want to see Srimati Radharani as the most beautiful, and that she is. And so after this description of the Lord is given, it is said that the Kumaras, they smelled the tulasi that was offered at the lotus feet. And when they smelled that, this, it describes how it changed their mind, right? And so Prabhupada talks about how impersonalism is inferior compared to the pleasure of seeing the transcendental beauty of the Lord. And they looked at him again and again, and they achieved the perfection of their meditation while they were looking at him. And finally, when their senses were completely taken in by the Lord's beauty, finally they spoke. They had seen him face to face, right? Now it's the moment that they were waiting for. They wanted to see him. The whole thing happened because they wanted to see him, and now they are seeing him. And Prabhupada says, can we with our imperfect senses see? No, that is not possible. It is only seen by a sincere devotee with the Lord's mercy. So they are saying hell or heaven, it's the same. Material engagement, it is all material if there is no engagement for the senses in the Lord's service. They feel obliged to the Lord because he showed himself to them. And one of the things that they pray is to not forget the Lord. It's to not stop speaking about the Lord's glories, and it is to not to stop hearing about the Lord, even if they go to hell. So the external things don't matter. It is some of these things that really matters to them. So I finished, I think, 3 out of my 7 chapters. Should we pause? Like, any comments? Or shall I continue with this? Okay. Now that they've come, the Supreme Lord speaks. So the Kumaras have spoken, the Supreme Lord speaks. Now he comes directly to the point. He says, these are my servants. I take complete responsibility of this action of them. They have committed an offense, and because of that, the responsibility lies on me. However, the Lord cannot tolerate being separated from, just like the devotees can't tolerate being separated from him, he can't tolerate being separated from his devotee. So in purport, Srila Prabhupada talks about how Lord Chaitanya would go to Haridas Thakur's house, because Haridas Thakur couldn't go to Jagannath Mandir. He would go and see him. He owns up the mistake completely. And one of the things that Srila Prabhupada says is, as Vaishnavas, any action we do reflects on the Lord. Now, this is my comment. It is true for ISKCON too. And I've heard Guru Maharaj speak about it. Anything that we do as ISKCON devotees has a bearing on, how people perceive of ISKCON. So the Lord shows us by example. And he says, you are Brahmanas. They should not have offended you. You, by perfection of your practice, have achieved me. And therefore, if there is an obstruction to your devotional service, even if it is my own limb, I am ready to cut it and throw it out. So he's saying, like Jaya and Vijaya, they are transcendental the servants of the Lord. So he's saying they're like a limb in my transcendental body, and I'm ready to cut it off. And then he's saying, I am attracted. He talks about what is attractive to him and what is not. He's not attracted to Lakshmi Devi's service. Instead, she is there because he serves the Brahmanas. He says, instead, offerings made during yajnas, if Brahmanas are fed, that is more satisfying. Why is that? Because a perfect Brahmana or a Vaishnava would offer it to Krishna anyway. And one of the things that was a key takeaway, attractive point for me was in this whole section. This is from the purport, but I like this point very much. He says, there is always a chance to commit an offense. But the key point is that in Vaikuntha Loka, just like how the doorkeepers, when something like that happened, the Lord rushed to their protection. The Lord is there to protect devotees, even if they commit their offenses. And he's just like that, he's there for us too. So after the Lord speaks such pleasing words, he glorifies the Brahmanas. He's saying, and in the purport, Srila Prabhupada talks about Advaita Acharya. So when it was the Shraddha ceremony of his father, the prasad that comes is first offered to Brahmanas. And Advaita Acharya offered it to Haridas Thakur, saying, you're a pure devotee of the Lord. If I feed you, it is like feeding thousands of Brahmanas. So that is how attractive a Brahmana is. And then in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is writing that the Ganga is a foot wash of Lord Vishnu. Now that is carried by Lord Shiva. We know Lord Shiva is a very, very, very special personality. So such a personality whose foot wash is carried by by Lord Shiva, if such a personality as he, the Lord, takes Vaishnavas on his head, then why won't others? And then he talks about, he's saying Brahmanas, cows, old people, children, women, they are to be protected. So Brahmanas and cows are to be protected. And so how should we treat the Brahmanas who are dear to the Lord? And so he's telling, even if it means, oh, Brahmanas, you're so dear to me that even if it means that you're cursing, we have to accept that curse. So with the understanding that Brahmanas and Vaishnavas are representatives of the Lord. Now, this is just a note from my end. I remember hearing this many years ago. There was a discussion. I think there was like a mentor meeting or something like that, probably a decade ago. And in those discussions, there was Apichet Sudurachara verse was discussed. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, if my memory serves me right, he says that sadhureva samantavya, in that somebody, a person who does not consider another person's temporary fall down is verily properly situated in his bhakti. So if we don't see a fault in others, a temporary fall down of a Vaishnava, then we become well situated in bhakti. So it just reminded me of that. So Vishnu is telling, don't this temporary offense, in a way, it should not be considered. So after he appeases the Kumaras, he says to them, I am eager to have Jaya and Vijaya back to Vaikuntha soon. So Prabhupada says, once we reach Vaikuntha, the Lord will not let us away. We can never fall down. And this incident was just an accident. Now the sages, after they heard the Lord speak, they heard him with rapt attention. But however perfect they were, they could not comprehend what he said. Was he pleased with them or was he upset with them? And they couldn't understand, but they were so delighted to behold him, and they felt it in their bodies. It was like a full-on experience. It was not just a mental experience, but it was a full-on experience for them. And the Lord spoke so humbly that they could understand that he was teaching them by his experience. He is the worshipable deity of the Brahmanas, and he's the one who protects religion and religious practices. So again, I think there is a table. I thought there is a table. Let me see. So after that, the Supreme Lord speaks. He says, actually, all of this happened by his supreme will. So Jaya and Vijaya will take birth in demoniac families, and they will never forget him. They will always remember him in anger. And Prabhupada writes that nothing can happen without the Lord's sanction. And he desired to fight. And that could not happen in Vaikuntha. And the fighting will have to happen in the material world. So the Lord's pastimes in the material world happens with his devotees. And so therefore, to fulfill the Lord's desire, all of these things happen. And all of this was just for the pleasure of the Lord. And right after that, the Kumaras circumambulated and they departed. And now he speaks to the Jaya and Vijaya and he tells them that he will not nullify it. He says that in mystic yoga, in anger, you will be purified of your sin of stopping the Brahmanas and you'll come to me in no time. And in that purport, Srila Prabhupada talks about the 5 primary rasas and the 7 secondary rasas and all of that. So somehow or the other, we have to become attached to the Supreme Lord. Smartavya satatam Vishnur, vismartavyo na jatuchit. Somehow or the other, we should always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna. Sarve vidhi nishedasyor etayor eva kinkaraha. All the rules and regulations are subordinate to this one rule, which is to remember Krishna always and never forget him. So this incident happened at the gates of Vaikuntha and the sages went back to the material world. And then right then, Jaya and Vijaya fell down from the position. And when the demigods saw this, it was like, alas, there was like a big sigh. And so now Brahma, now coming back, Brahma is now recollecting all of this to the demigods. He is saying, this fearsome darkness that you're seeing are demons in Diti's womb. And these demons are none other than Jaya and Vijaya. And again, in that purport, Srila Prabhupada talks about Garbhadhana Samskara and how the mind, especially the father's mind, must be sober and devotional. Brahma tries to pacify the troubled demigod, saying, it is not in your power to fight with Jaya and Vijaya because these two are extremely powerful. In fact, they are even more powerful than the demigods. It is beyond your power, and this is because of the will of the Supreme Lord. Another point that Prabhupada makes is that he says we should not be affected by reversals, and he gives many, many examples. Like the preachers being killed, or Haridas Thakur's beating, the Jesus Christ, and Prahlad Maharaj, being persecuted by his father. So he says we should just accept that this is some plan of the Lord and accept it as his grace. Again, this table is by Bhayahari Prabhu. He is comparing the verse that the Lord spoke and after that what Kumara spoke. The Lord said, for instance, he says, to me, the Brahmanas are the highest and most beloved. And Kumara saying, but Lord, you are the supreme director of the Brahmanical culture. You protect dharma. You are worshipable deity of the Brahmanas. So there is this back and forth that happens in this table. You can, due to lack of time. And again, this is also there in Bhayari Prabhu's notes. He talks about all these sinful, the four sources of sinful offenses and how it is eradicated and all of that. How in Bhajana Kriya, for instance, Ekadesha Avartini, meaning one anartha is taken care of. Which anartha? The anartha that comes from sinful activities. Just like, for example, when we take the 4 vows during our initiation, the sinful activities, we stop those, right? So, and then, for example, if you're a Nishtha, you're established in devotional service, like you're steady, not established, you're steady in your devotional service. And so then those activities that comes from the offenses coming from sinful activities are almost eradicated. And the offenses that come from cultivation of bhakti are also almost eradicated. So this table is given by Prabhu. I'm going to go to the next. I have 3 more chapters. I hope to not keep you all waiting after the set time. So when Brahma thus spoke, the demigods were extremely fearful. Like it was a very, very, but when Brahma spoke, saying this is what is happening, the will of the Lord is there, then the fear was driven away. So Prabhupada says that regardless of where we are, either in the animal or a human being or even demigods, the fear is always there because that's part of the material world package. The difference, however, is that the demigods, they approach a higher authority and their problem is solved, just like right now. Whereas an ordinary living entity, we don't, and our fear is still there with us. So after that, Diti gave birth to twins. And imagine, so it was already fearsome when they were in the womb. Now that they are born, the symptoms are, manifold, exacerbated. So extreme weather, extreme temperatures, natural disasters, earthquakes, high waves, all of that is described. Like the animals, they showed symptoms. The planet, the Saturn and Mars, they showed some symptoms. So all of that was happening. And it filled people's hearts with fear. And again, Prabhupada again writes about the way to check demoniac population is by Garbhadana Samskara, to beget good progeny. The only way to achieve peace is by having good progeny. And the way to achieve that is through Vedic injunctions. If we do not follow regulations in life or for social tranquility, we cannot expect peace. Rather, we'll have to undergo the stringent reactions of natural laws. Now, I remember many years ago when I was hearing Guru Maharaj speak, one of the lectures, he said, I forget the context of it, but he said something like in New York, he got off a train and the environment was so inauspicious in one sense. And actually, Prabhupada, it is basically from Prabhupada's purport. Whenever we see such natural disaster, it means a demoniac person is born at that time. And in the modern times, there's so many such disasters, which means so many bad progeny, which means lack of Vedic injunctions, like lack of, we're not following it. So then after that, the extraordinary strength of these demons are described. They were ornamented, that they're extremely strong. And Prabhupada writes that the material world, we are all we are concerned with this material beauty, like strength and all of that. And this is interesting. He says, if a race appears strong in body, their country is materially considered to be amongst the highly advanced nations of the world. So again, there is a little bit of, quote unquote science in these purports. He talks about how Hiranyaksha was conceived second, but he was born first. And Hiranyakashipu was conceived first and he was born second. And both of these demons were fearless because they had the blessings of Brahma. They received a boon from Brahma. And because they had fallen from the Vaikuntha, they would not be killed by anybody from the material world. They could only be killed by the Lord. And this was, a plan of the Lord. So, when the Lord does one thing, he accomplishes many, many things. One of the things he's accomplishing through this pastime is that however strong one may be, like Hiranyakashipu or Hiranyaksha, they still are perishable. So the younger brother, Hiranyaksha, he had a mentality of fighting because he wanted to please his older brother. And Prabhupada makes a comment. He says, in spiritual association, we engage everyone and everything in the Lord's service. Whereas in material association, the tendency is to exploit nature for one's own sense gratification. Again, Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu were fearless and they were proud, which means that they had a lot of piety. And so this is again a comment from my side. Maharaj says that material piety with impure heart means pride, and pride often leads to cruelty. And that's what was happening. They were so cruel and proud that the demigods were fleeing their abodes. Hiranyaksha dove into the ocean as if it was a sport. And all the ocean creatures, they were fleeing in fear. He went to Varuna's abode and he begged him, can you please fight with me? And Varuna said, he responded saying, there is an ancient person, that supremely ancient person. He is the one that is fit for you to fight. And anyway, so Hiranyaksha quickly went to meet this originally ancient person, the strong one, to fight. And Varuna says, you are so proud of your body and your prowess and your strength. There will come a time when this body of yours, which is made of 5 material elements, will perish and it will become a food for the dogs and vultures. So after this, we are in home stretch right now, 18 and 19. The battle of Hiranyaksha and the Lord is described. So after he heard that there is an ideal combatant, he learned from Narada where this person was. And he saw Varaha Dev and he addressed him as a beast. He was like, because the Lord was in this form of a boar. It was predicted that he would perish, right? But he still went for that battle because of less intelligence and he desired to fight. And Prabhupada says that, people with less intelligence, they can't appreciate the Lord's activities and his birth. So he couldn't appreciate the Lord in the form, in this particular form. But the Lord can come in any form that he wishes to come in. And Hiranyaksha speaks in derision. He speaks harsh words, like all of this. So for example, on the left, this is what Hiranyaksha is saying. He's saying, you are a resident of the forest or water. You are an animal. You are the lowest of the demigods. You cannot go without being hurt by me. You're a fool. You're, things like that. You bring grief and all of that. And Sridhar Swami says, I believe it is Sridhar Swami. Let me see. Yes. Sridhar Swami says, this was actually an indirect praise of the Supreme Lord. When he says Vanagocharaha, it means he's referring to Narayana, who's laying on water, causal ocean. When he's saying Mriga, it means he who's sought after by the sages. When he's saying Agnya or foolish, it means he knows everything, and so on and so forth. So this is actually an indirect glorification of the Supreme Lord. Now, there is this is very interesting section, at least for me. It is said that the Lord, he tolerated this abuse of Hiranyaksha. It was painful for him because Hiranyaksha spoke so many harsh words. Now, he did not pay heed to those harsh words. Instead, he did his, quote unquote duty. Now, of course, the Lord doesn't have any duty, but he wanted to show by his example that to demigods that they should be doing the duty no matter what. Even if they're afraid, they should still do it. And so the Lord, he did not pay heed to those words, harsh words, and he placed Bhumi Devi he took her to safety and he left her there. And while he was going, this Hiranyaksha was speaking all of these harsh words. Now, this Prabhupada says, the Lord is not impersonal. He has feelings. He's sentient. So he feels the pain and pleasure, just like, for example, if somebody were to offer, devotional prayers, it pleases him. Just like here, where he's speaking harsh words and it is causing pain. Now, this is in a transcendental sense. This is not like the pain and pleasure we may feel, but this is to show that he, as the Supreme Lord, is sentient. He is a being. He is a person, and he has his feelings. So, anyway, so he places Bhumi Devi in a place of safety. And Hiranyaksha is saying, hey, where are you running away? Come and fight with me. And Prabhupada says this derision was like dogs barking, and the Lord did not care for it. Now that he's placed Bhumi in her place, and he's set her in, invested his potency in her, now he starts to speak. He says, hey, Hiranyaksha, you are bound by the ropes of birth and death. Why are you indulging in this loose talk? Meaning that, he who's going to meet his death really soon. Then Varahadev says, you can't drive me out of any place. I'm not going anywhere because I am everywhere. He's all pervasive, right? Now, then he's saying, Varaha is saying, you Hiranyaksha, you stay right here and you fight with me. And then the demon was very angry and he shook. There's so much description in these purports of how his, like the bodily transformation, he shook like a snake, like a cobra. And the demon, it is, again, this is Prabhupada explains, he says, like a cobra may dance in front of a snake charmer, but when it sees normal people, it hisses and it wants to strike them. Similarly, a demon may be powerful in his realm, but he is insignificant in front of Varahadev. And anyway, so the demon comes and he strikes a blow and the Lord dodges him. And then the Lord tries to strike the demon and the demon dodges him. Another name that is given of Hiranyaksha is known as Hariyaksha. And then they struck each other's maces. They were both struck. They struck each other's bodies and the blood was oozing and the smell of the blood enraged them even more. And this was a terrible fight. And the analogy that's given is when two bulls are fighting for a cow. And since Mother Planet is also, her another name is Go, this analogy is quite apt. And the Lord here is another name that's given as Yagnya Avayava, meaning he's not an ordinary boar. His form is Yagnya. He can assume any form and he can possess any form, and those forms are all existent eternally. It is from him that other forms have emanated. So this body is full of Yagnya, meaning it is not material. It is rather made of worshipful offerings. It is completely spiritual. So then when this fighting back and forth was happening, the example that's given is of the cat and the mouse. It was almost like a play when that was happening. Brahma appeared at that scene and he started to offer prayers. Brahmaji says, oh Lord, this demon that you're fighting with is troublesome to the Brahmanas, to the cows, to the innocent people and to demigods. Oh Lord, this Brahmana, now he's saying, Prabhupada, I think I wanted to mention this. In the purport, Prabhupada says that demons are often found to appease the demigods. They get boons from them for their sense gratification. The example is given of Bhasmasura and Lord Shiva. He got a boon from Lord Shiva and he wanted to use that boon against Lord Shiva himself. So he's saying these demons they are vicious like a snake. Please stop playing with him and kill him immediately. He's saying now is the auspicious hour of Abhijit and it's a good time. After this time is the time of Sandhya, and which is a demoniac hour. They become even more powerful. They may come up with fantastic tricks. So Brahma is begging, please, oh Lord, with your internal potency, please kill this demon and establish world peace. And once that was done, the Lord is pleased with Brahma's prayers. Why? Because those prayers are free from sinful purposes. He says materialistic people, they also pray to the Lord, but because they want something from him. But people like Brahma, when they pray, it is free from those sinful purposes because it is for the pleasure of the Lord. And Prabhupada talks a lot about the purpose in the purport. And I was thinking, like, for example, in the past, when I've attended some japa retreats, one of the things that we are often asked about is sankalpa, right? Like, and the image that is often given is of magnifying lens. I remember this Guru Maharaj said many years ago. He says, like, the sun rays are everywhere, but when you bring the magnifying lens, it concentrates all of that sun's rays. And when it comes on a paper, it can even cause fire. So our sankalpa, our purpose is what concentrates our activities, and it can make it so powerful that it can strike a fire. So I'm interchanging both of them, but basically in our activities, the purpose or the why needs to be clear for our own selves. Going forward, then the fighting. So after Brahma speaks thus, he offers prayers, the Lord accepts it, and now the fighting it's fierce. So Hiranyaksha strikes the Lord, and the Lord's mace falls down. Then the demon, even though he was a demon, he followed the law of the single combat, and this infuriated the Lord. Then the Lord, meaning he didn't want to fight because the Lord didn't have any weapon. So the Lord invoked the Sudarshana, and then there was this tumult that arose amongst the onlookers, and they begged the Lord, please kill him. And then seeing this, the demon became extremely angry, and he jumped and he tried to knock off the Lord. And then the Lord knocked off the demon's mace with his left foot. And then the Lord said, pick up your mace and fight. And when he did that, he picked up his mace and he fought. Then the Lord easily grabbed it, and then he humiliated the demon and he offered it back to him. So in this way, there was a lot of back and forth. And finally, the demon, now that he lost his mace, he had a blazing or a flaming trident, which he wanted to strike. He wanted to strike the Lord with the flaming trident. And but it did not bother him, just like, it was almost like a flower that was being offered to him. And the example or the analogy that's given is when a father fights with his son, it was like a good fight. It was very pleasurable to him. But this fighting brought a fearsome environment. There was fierce winds, darkness, hailstorms, stones came in volleys, and the luminaries, meaning the stars and everything, the sky, they all disappeared. There was rain of all these inauspicious items. All of that happened, and finally the Lord unleashed the Sudarshana. Just at that moment, Prabhupada writes in the purport that there is a verse, and Prabhupada writes in the purport as well. So Diti remembered just at that moment, for her, she remembered that her sons who were demons would be killed by the Lord. And it was their good fortune. And the purport Prabhupada writes that when a mother is moved by affection, milk flows from her breast. But here in this case, blood flowed. Why is that? And then because in this case, it was the demon's mother, and the blood was not transformed into milk. When the blood is transformed into milk, it is auspicious. However, when it is not, it is totally inauspicious. And he makes the case, therefore, cow killing should stop. So again, going back, the demon, he became extremely angry and he wanted to tightly crush and embrace the Lord and crush him. And when he thought he had held the Lord, he was surprised that the Lord was just outside of his embrace. And one can remember something similar happened with Dhritarashtra, right? Like after the battle of Kurukshetra, Dhritarashtra wanted to embrace Bhima and crush him. And anyways, so then the other story that I was remembering was the story of Kaliyavana. Kaliyavana kept running behind Krishna, and throughout the chase, the Lord was just beyond him. He thought, I'm going to catch Krishna, but he never could catch him. So no one can measure or capture or control the Supreme Lord. He makes himself available to us as Archa Vigraha in that tiny little form. And Prabhupada writes, we can carry him in a box and take him everywhere. It is because of his mercy that he makes himself available. And in this section, the Lord is addressed by different names. Their importance is given. So anyway, after this whole thing was happening, like when the Lord, after the demon tried to embrace and crush him, the Lord very nonchalantly flicked his ear, at the root of his ear. And this was enough to separate the soul from the body. And it is said that even after his death, the demon's luster did not fade away because he was touched by the Lord. And after his death, Brahma exclaimed, how glorious was this death? And the commentary by Prabhupada is that real yoga means not to keep our body fit, but rather to get rid of one's material body. So when we perform the dhyana and dharana and samadhi and all of that, it is to think of the Lord. Then one has perfection of the Lord, perfection of that activity. And this opportunity was given to the demon. The Supreme Lord was right there. The demon was looking at him. He was thinking of him in anger. And this made everyone feel astonished. And these two demons will go back to their eternal positions as servants after a few births. And then after that, the demigods also express their gratitude. And this is the final section of this chapter. And some of these notes are just my own understanding. So then the glories of after the demon died, the glories of the Lord, his devotional service, and the necessary qualifications are all given. So the Supreme Lord is described. He left for his own abode. He is pervasive. He's everywhere. So the Lord who is everywhere also has his own abode. He resides in his abode. He is the original boar, the Adi Sukara. And as the absolute truth, he is the origin of everything. He accomplishes many, many purposes when he descends, right? Like he killed the demon. It is pleasurable for his devotees. His own desire of fighting was satisfied. And he sets example how a Brahmana should be treated. He sets an example of how a curse by a Brahmana should be accepted. He shows by his example how humble he is and how we should follow in his footsteps. He shows by his example why Brahmanas and cows are important to him. He shows by this Lila how Garbhadana is important and the importance of progeny. So he accomplishes many, many, many things through this pastime. And his powers are unlimited. It is said that this demon was more powerful than the demigods, but he still was no match for the Supreme Lord. So his position is absolute, and therefore hearing about him is the same as being in his presence. So this, according to me, is, I've just put this as Sambandha, but I feel like this encapsulates it, because the next part of it is Prabhupada talks about hearing. And there is a lot of importance to that. He says, we have to hear from a bona fide source. When we hear from a bona fide source, then we feel the transcendental pleasure. When we don't hear from an authentic or an authoritative source, then it is like drinking a milk that's been touched by a snake. So what to speak of us, even animals like Gajendra, when he is also delivered by the Supreme Lord. This devotional service is accessible to everyone except the faithless beings. So this is one qualification, right? So in the Abhideya part is hearing from authoritative sources. The second thing that I could pull out from the purport is that the attitude of gratitude. Prabhupada writes, a simple and grateful heart is he doesn't write it, these are my words, and it's a fertile ground in which the seed of bhakti can sprout and grow. He talks about how ungrateful persons, it is not in their capacity to serve the Lord. So hearing and developing this attitude of gratitude, hearing from a bona fide source is the key. And Prabhupada also talks about the 5 potent forms of bhakti, which is chanting the holy name, residing in Dham, reading the Bhagavatam, serving the deity, and serving the devotee. So these are the 5 potent forms of bhakti, and he talks about that. And finally, when we do these activities, what is the prayojana? And I think it is best when we hear from Prabhupada's words what the prayojana is. Prabhupada writes, if one continues to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, which is full of narratives of the pastimes of the Lord, at the end of this life, one is sure to be transferred to the eternal transcendental abode of the Lord. Thus, hearers are benefited both ultimately and for as long as they are in the material world. That is the supreme, sublime result of engaging in devotional service. So this is the prayojana that is being provided in this particular section. So there ends my presentation. And again, my gratitude to Bhayahari Prabhu and to Premakeshwar Prabhu, and for all of you for coming today and supporting. And I'm also grateful for people who spoke before me and who are going to speak after me. Hare Krishna. Prabhu, you're speaking something, but I can't hear you.
You are not muted, but we can't hear you, bro.
No.
Anyway, I will say something, Mataji.
Yes,
Thank
Prabhu.
you so much. It's wonderful. As if I'm watching when you were relating, I see as if I'm watching what you're saying. Very beautifully related.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then also you were talking about this Videshna Charo. It's really important that we as devotees, we understand this. We don't look at, it's just a tip of the iceberg that we see what a devotee is doing here. Maybe it's a lesson for us, not to judge them. And me, the way I hope I can practice this in my life. When I see somebody doing something, even though we are seeing apparently it's wrong, it's teaching us. As this devotee, they have given their life, they are doing a lot of service. We're not here to judge them. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. When I heard it for the first time, the Bhaktivinoda Thakur says it's not the offender, rather the people who are observing that offender and they're thinking that, no, this is a temporary fault and I should not judge them, then I am situated rightly in my devotional service. Yeah, it blew my mind. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. That was excellent presentation. I don't know how it's just flowed, as Saranga Prabhu was pointing out. It just flowed without any hindrance. No, that is amazing. That much you have absorbed in that pastime. That's what it shows. So I know that 7 chapters you covered in time. That is gargantuan task. I don't know. I have a few chapters to cover also myself. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'll try myself. We'll see. I don't think I can come anywhere closer to what you have done today. One thing I was thinking of, in the same topic that you and Sarang Prabhu was discussing about that offenses, how Lord Vishnu came to protect his devotee in Vaikuntha. When the doorkeepers committed an offense. Similarly, in Bhagavad Gita, it says apichet sudharacharo. Very consistent between Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam, what Lord Vishnu says and what Lord Vishnu did and what Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. It's very consistent. How our scriptures are cross-referable. There is no inconsistencies in our scripture, isn't it? And that amazed me actually when you brought out that point. How clear, nicely it is evident. It's just not Krishna saying, but Vishnu does it in Vaikuntha. How we protected. And I think you mentioning about Bhaktivinoda Thakur statement. Isn't it his dream that he is revealing his confidential mind? Something along that line, I remember. He also writes, I'm not supposed to share this confidential matter. Something like that. Yes. I heard this long time ago.
Yes, I think demigods are there. He's conversing with the demigods.
That's right.
Like conversation with them, and he's saying this is his understanding of that verse or something like that.
That's right. So yeah. I heard from Maharaj. That's right. Thank you very much for your class, and wonderful class. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. I just like to, just like the other devotees, I was glued to the screen all the way through. I was really enthralled by your presentation, some or other. I mean, just like one devotee said, it just flowed, and the way how you put everything together, so many chapters just flow one into the other. Right? It was like very, very inspiring for me. I couldn't leave the screen, although I wasn't there for, my picture wasn't there. But I'm totally, impressed, by your presentation and your overview. I call it an overview. Just refresh, everything that we had learned, in the many sessions from by Hari Prabhu. So once again, thank you so much.
I pass it on to Bhayari Prabhu and Srila Prabhupada's purpose. It belongs to them.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Pranam, Mataji. What a beautiful class, Mataji. That, you narrated, like Sarang Prabhu was saying, that we are literally seeing, like, you are narrating the pastime of, 4 Kumaras going to Vaikuntha, or, Diti speaking with her husband, and, even Varaha Dev with the fighting. So you narrated it so well. Like, I was thinking that how lucky your kids are that you must be more dramatically telling them.
I do. I think that's what helped me. I tell them a lot of stories of the Lord, so I think that helped me. But I think I felt sorry because there's so much juicy details in Bhagavatam, the way it's described. All of that couldn't be captured, of course. So it's, yeah.
So much you presented, Mataji. It is not just narration of like a story, but you referred, the scriptural references, and your pronunciation is impeccable. Like, your, whatever Smartatvam Satatam Vishnu, and you are explaining that, that is so wonderful that, I am sure that your kids are not just getting the stories, but the essential lessons from you. And I really enjoyed. Thank you.
Thank you. You set the ball rolling, Prabhu. You are the brave one. Thank you.
No, Mataji. Yeah, thank you so much.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Okay, Prabhu. Thank you. Hare Krishna.